Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you might be around the world. Thank you for joining today's Ask a Professional Scrum Trainer. And I'm joined today by Professional Scrum Trainer Peter Gfader. Welcome, Peter. My
Hello.
name is Eric Neighbor, and I'll be your host today. Let's get started. Next slide. So just some quick guidelines. You will be muted throughout. We will have this recorded, and the recording will be available up on our website, actually possibly as a podcast, depending on how this all goes, within the next 24 hours. You can put your questions into the Q&A box. You should see that at the bottom of your screen. Ask your questions. We'll get to as many as we can. And those that we don't get to, we'll do our best to answer via email following the event. Next slide. Just briefly, for those of you new to this and to Scrum.org, who is Scrum.org? Scrum.org is founded by and our chairman, Ken Schwaber, the co-creator of Scrum. Ken started Scrum.org in 2009 with a mission to help people and teams solve complex problems. And we do that through thought leadership, things like this webinar, which help you to learn and grow through training. Peter, one of our trainers, certification to validate your knowledge, and ongoing learning through learning paths and other things that we put out there to help you keep learning. We believe that professionals are always learning, and we need to provide that content to you. We try to do that. Other than training and certification, everything else we put out there is complimentary or free to help ensure that you have the resources that you need to be successful as you move forward in your careers. Next slide. And with that, I will let Peter introduce himself, and I'll go hide in the background. And Peter, it's all yours.
Thank you, Eric. Hello, welcome everyone. My name is Peter Gfader. I'm Italian, German speaking, living in Switzerland. And my great passion is to help teams to get better in whatever they're doing. My main focus is software, since I'm a software engineer by passion and by trade. So that's where my background is. And since in the last 15, 20, 25 years, I collected stuff. You could call it experiences or experiments to try. And I give this to the teams or the organizations I work with. And today I'm going to share some of those experiences. And I'm really looking forward to the questions, Eric.
Excellent. So we can get started. We've got some questions starting to come in. I know we wanted to talk a bit about more on the technical side today in talking about software development and development teams. So let's start with why is pair programming so hard?
Cool. Why is pair programming so hard? I just started to share my screen, and I'm also making some notes on the topics we are going to talk about. Now, in my experience, why is pair programming so hard? I have here my pen and I'm going to draw stuff. Now, one of the major reasons why pair programming is so hard, I think, is because every person lives on their little island. So I have my own little world of seeing the world through my lenses. So that could be my current mood, my current understanding of the problem that we are talking about, my current culture context, my current situation that I work in, my current domain knowledge, my current technology language and things like that. And where I got this idea from to think about these islands is from Vera F. Birkenbiel. She is very famous in the brain, how do you call that? In the brain science world, Vera F. Birkenbiel. And she has this concept of an island, that every person lives on their island. And if you want to understand someone else, you need to first go closer to their island and try to see the world through that lens of that person. And I think one of the major reasons why pair programming is so hard, that every person lives on their own island, and it's very hard to get to see the world in another pairs of shoes. So this is the social part, I think, of this problem. The next answer to the question why pair programming is so hard is this, in my experience at least, that if I have an idea and I want to bring this idea into the code base, into whatever we are working on as a pair, it's very hard to communicate my idea for a lot of people. And so I found one concept very, very powerful, and that's the concept from Llewellyn Falco called strong style communication. Now, what does that mean? Strong style communication means that if we are working together on something, let's assume we are writing software. So there is a computer somewhere and there is a keyboard. And one person, the typist, is sitting in front of the keyboard. And for me, as a navigator, or the person that is actually communicating with the typist, now the idea of strong style communication is that the idea needs to go through someone else's hands into the computer. Idea, hands, computer. I'm just trying to think about how I could visualize what I'm trying to say. So strong style communication means if I have an idea I want to try out when we work as a pair, I actually need to give away the keyboard and I give it to you, Eric, as an example. And then I need to communicate to you, Eric, and you then need to type it into the computer or do the work or whatever we are working on as a pair. So this is the concept of strong style communication. And this is, in my experience, very, very hard, but this enforces this problem of how do we communicate between the two of us. So this is a little tool, a little tip that I can give if you're new to pair programming. Try out this way of communication. And usually people find this communication style very hard. And then there is another concept again from Llewellyn Falco. I actually write down his name. Do I get his name right? Llewellyn Falco. So there's another person I can recommend to look up on the internets. And the other idea is if you're communicating in a pair, try to do that in 3 steps. And maybe the 3 steps are not necessary, but maybe think in that order, let's say. So what's the intent? What are we trying to do? What are you trying to communicate in your idea? Where do you want to take that place? And the third step is then the details. So for example, if we are working on something, then I tell Eric, hey Eric, I have an idea. Just here is the keyboard. Let's try this out. And then I tell him, okay, my intention is, and then we go into the location. Okay, in order to do this, I would suggest we create something over there with a class and the collaborator or something. And then with the details, maybe I tell him, create a new function that returns something. And then I go into the more details about what is that something and so on. So pair programming is hard because it highlights social potential improvements. And the other thing is this tip about strong style communication and intent location details as a tip to how to improve your pair programming experience. So these are 2 things, I think, yeah. And empathy probably works as well, but that's again related to the islands. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Peter. Yeah, it's interesting as pair programming. I see a lot of people writing about it and talking online about pair programming and the concern about 2 people doing one job and that sort of thing. But reality is it's an opportunity to learn. It's an opportunity to grow. It leads to higher quality results as well, because you're pairing in time, and you're sharing live, and then the quality outputs that I see for when people are pairing just seem to be greatly improved. So great, thank you. We have Samantha's asked a question. Peter, what techniques would you recommend to make backlog refinement more effective and interactive?
Oh, cool. What techniques can you recommend to make backlog refinements more effective and efficient?
Interactive, effective and interactive.
Indirect. Okay. I assume that we all know what backlog refinement is. And now, I would like to step back before I answer the question. Now, backlog refinement is all about, we are planning our future sprints or potential future sprints. And when we plan a sprint, my recommendation is always to think about outcomes. What outcome do we try to achieve in the further next sprints? Where are we at the moment, and where could we actually potentially go from here? So, and in order to think about outcomes, what helps me a lot is a technique called impact mapping. Now, impact mapping is something that was, I'm not sure if I should say invented, but I'm pretty sure that Gojko Acic has written a couple of interesting articles and a great book, by the way, about impact mapping. And the key aspect of impact mapping is collaboration between business stakeholders, subject matter experts, developers, engineers, business analysts, testers, whoever is involved in that product development journey. So that's a great tool to enable collaboration, let's say. The second thing, what I like about impact mapping and being it so interactive and effective is because it's very visual. Usually you do it on a big canvas, on a big board, you use a big wall, or you use Miro. So that's one of the reasons why it's quite interactive. It works as well with a Miro board from the interactivity point of view. And the effectiveness, which I think is key here, is the impact map, which is a version of a specific mind map, has always the business context and the business goal in mind. And if you talk about business goals as a first level of the mind map, and you always try to think, okay, where should we go from here? Is this the right direction? What's a minimum way on how to make impact and how to get our users or our stakeholders or actors or our people to do something different, start doing something, or stop doing something? That would be the impact. And later on, we talk about deliverables. That would be actually the fourth step on this impact map. And the reason why I say it's so effective is because it tries to think in, okay, what's a minimum experiment that we could run to know if this hypothesis that we have written down here is actually true or not. So it's all about validating assumptions. So that's a very cool thing. The second thing about it being effective, because it's always related to the business goal. So that's the reason why I think it's very effective. And the interactivity really comes from doing it all together. So that would be my first tool that I would highly recommend as part of backlog refinements. And if you go into the details, then I would highly recommend user story mapping. User story mapping, I need to write down another name, Jeff Patton. He has written great books about these topics as well. And I think he is the one who codified user story mapping. again, the user story mapping has this huge advantage. You do it on a big canvas, on a big board, on a big wall, on a big canvas, on a big mirror thingy. So the idea here is you see the big picture. And then if you see the big picture, then you dive into the details. And as a team, as an organization, then you decide, okay, where should we go deeper? Now that you see the big picture, where should we go deeper? But this is really the power of the user story map, because usually when I work with teams, they only get one piece of the whole puzzle. Hey, dear sales backend team, please implement this new logic on how to implement potential leads that we have in our database. That's just a little tiny puzzle piece of a backlog item that this team receives. So it doesn't see the whole picture of the user flow, of the customer journey that you usually see in the user story map. And it doesn't see the whole, okay, what impact do we try to achieve? How can we make the sales decisions better by doing this? How can we approach leads earlier? By how much earlier? Do we talk about days, weeks, hours? And that's the interesting discussion. And these tools really work together, I think, very well. They're visible, visual, interactive, and very effective when you work together with teams. Now, I would keep it with that because there are two more tools that I could mention. So one is example mapping. If you go down from the user story mapping level down to example mapping, but I think then we are leaving the interactivity and the effectiveness point of view. If you get started with just those two tools, that's already huge, I think.
Great, thanks, Peter. We have another question. Let's see. What metrics do you use to identify the team's current state or mood and their progress? So are there any tools, any metrics that you capture? How do you measure the team?
So the short answer would be, I try to avoid it. The even shorter answer would be, don't do it. And then I have a question back. What do you try to achieve with that measurement? Is there a possibility that we can ask questions back?
Yeah, so we can hold and have them answer that question, and we can come back to this as well. Yeah. If you can type that, what is it that you're trying to achieve? I know one of the things that we've often done in Senior, there's different techniques like just putting a happy face, a sad face, or a kind of in between face into a brown bag and look at that. But to me, I like to make things actionable. So it's not just the happiness of the team, but it's really, if they're not happy, why? If they're happy, why? And what can we do to improve? Because we want to inspect and adapt. We want to keep learning, and it's more than just measure. But let's get back to that one as we get more questions, or as they respond to that question. I apologize. So let's look at the next one. How do you manage errors from production during a sprint? Do you leave it for another sprint? Do you add it to the current sprint? What do you recommend?
Cool. During a sprint, let's say, how do you handle errors during the sprint? Short answer is it depends really from the error. Like if we are losing money, or we have a terminology in our training, in the Scrum developer training, where we decide, we actually define what is a bug. So let me just write that down because I think that might be interesting. So we define what is a bug, what is an incident, and both probably are meant when in that question when we ask about How do you handle errors from production during the sprint? Now, incident in my world means we have a problem and we need to fix it now, otherwise we're losing money. So losing money. So this is not something we can postpone and can say, okay, we will talk about in the next retrospectives. We have no idea about the fix or something. We don't care about it. And for now, we just continue on with our sprint and we do our best in the next sprint. So an incident is really when you need to stop the line, hit the button, and then, okay, the whole team needs to find out, okay, what's going on? We're losing money, we're losing data, our data center is on fire. Whatever it is in our Kafka cluster, something is really bad. We need to do something in order to get our production systems up and running. Now, how do I handle that? Now, what I definitely recommend to do is get either, depending now, yeah. Now the quick answer is ask the team. And I would definitely act. So there is not if we are talking about an incident, then you need to do something. And this doing something is fix it, getting it up and running. But then comes the interesting part. And the interesting part for me is then once your fix is in production and production is up and running again and everything is green, I would highly recommend to do proper root cause analysis. And this is something I see not enough in our software industry, at least. Now, proper root cause analysis means we're going to do a deep dive into the issue. And I'm not sure if that's, that deep dive into the issue. So then second question, how to prevent in the future? And I hope we have something in place that this is not able to happen again. For example, you have an alert, a monitor, an automatic test that executes that function or that part of the system so that this incident cannot happen anymore, or an architecture fitness function that is making sure that the numbers stay within a range, otherwise you would get a notification or something. So the first two steps are the hardest, I think. And then the third step is share the learning. Share the learning. Share the learning in the team, in the teams, and in the organization. And the easiest way is set up a little wiki somewhere where you collect these things and people can subscribe to these things, Confluence, whatever wiki tool you're using, and then do basically a post-mortem deep dive into the issue, how to prevent in the future, and share learning. And I think the first two steps are the hardest, because depending on the issue, usually it could be very hard to reproduce the problem because the data is not there anymore. The servers have restarted and then they are not in the situation anymore. So this is hard. And if you have figured out the first step, the second step is still hard, but not so much. I think the hardest part is really the first step.
Thanks, Peter.
I have just one point, and why I'm saying this proper root cause analysis is I see not done enough. And this is, in my experience, the only way to get out of this cycle of every sprint we have incidents, every sprints. And what teams then do is teams calculate in some buffers. So they have a fast lane, or they have a buffer, or they have some fictional story points, or they have some incident management buffer, or whatever weird things they have. And the only way to get out of these weird things is to do proper root cause analysis and fix and prevent these things from happening in the future.
Thank you, Peter. So we have some feedback back on that initial the metrics question.
Cool.
Thank you, Marnia, for passing that in. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. what they're looking at is, why do we have metrics? Can we get a real idea of how happy the team is? And really, at the end of the day, do you have some exercises, some practices that you do to continue to make the team more effective and continue to improve how the team's working?
Cool, great question. Now, what I'm thinking about is that 5 years ago, I would have said it's very important that you have a happy team. Your employees are very key in the organization. If your people are not happy, then they can't do a good job and a good service. But is it really my responsibility as a manager to ensure that everyone is happy? I don't know. I would actually disagree. And this is actually something that's everyone's responsibility to ensure that they are happy, especially in their context that they are living in. Now, the only thing that we can do as managers, I'm standing now in the position of a manager, I'm wearing now my management tie, is that we can create a work environment where teams can actually make an impact with their work. In my experience, that boosts motivation a lot, and which is related to happiness. And get out of the way, give them the tools, the systems, the infrastructure that the development teams need to build great work, and then work on impediments that stand in their ways, which is a Scrum Master job. So the whole happiness of a team for me is, I don't know, it's not so important anymore, let's say. On the other hand, my other heart that is in me is my engineering heart is, and when I was working in the teams, for me, it was always a good sign if there is happiness in the room or if there are insider jokes in the room. Because then I knew exactly, okay, the team has the social aspect of the team is now in a very good state where we actually have inside jokes, we make fun of each other or about someone or about our work or about our lives. And usually this is a very good indicator that everything is going well. It can be too much though as well. If you're having too much fun, it's going the direction of sarcasm where people are just, okay, this is just a shit show. We can't change anything in here. My job sucks. I'm hope it's 5. And then it turns into sarcasm. So there is a little danger there as well. But in general, if the fun part is somewhere in the middle, that's a good indicator of an effective team, of a team that is working well and potentially as well happy. And since we're talking about happiness, for me, when I worked in teams, it was never key that we get free pizza or free coffee or we have beanbags or all that other stuff, because that's a nice to have. But for me, happiness is really, I know what I'm doing makes an impact to someone, to our potential users, our customers, clients, sponsors, people that are buying our products or investing in them or something. That's really a key motivator, I think, or should at least in most teams. The second thing being everything that we need to do in order to get our job done, in order to make someone else's life better, gets out of the way. I have infrastructure, I have tools, I have software, I have an in development environment, I have free monitors, I have a great webcam and microphone. Everything is there that I need to do a proper job. And if these things are in place, the happiness comes from alone, I would say. So what I'm trying to say that you could measure happiness, but you should probably not try to influence happiness, but you should try to influence the system. And if you change the system, it has an impact on the happiness of your employees and then of your development teams. And this is how I think, in my experience at least, the relationship between happiness and effective teams hangs together. And regarding tools, I don't know, I had very good experience, and I'm curious about what other people think. In my experience, a retrospective where you really are open and you talk about things that trouble you can be very, very team bonding and can have a huge impact on happiness and on team motivation and on the social aspect of everything. So proper retrospectives, and we have we know that we are continuously improving the way on how we work, has a huge impact on happiness and motivation. And then we don't need to do all the tree hugging games and fun retrospectives and whatnot things people are doing out in the world. That's my opinion.
Thanks, Peter. Yeah, I think there's, yeah, happiness is obviously important because the happier people are, the more positive they are. There's a great book by a gentleman, Daniel Pink, called Drive, that looks at what really drives people and what motivates people. Is it money? Often not. It's a combination of lots of things. In a big part of it is around satisfaction in the work they're doing, and kind of what you talked about. Are people using my product? Are people happy with my product? And the like. Obviously, people need to get along on the team and other things too. So that was great. Thank you. Next question. What do you think about the idea of no estimates and the thesis that the project outcome would be the same or even better if we didn't do any estimation?
No estimates. What do you think about? And the second part was,
So would the project outcome be even better or the same if we didn't do any estimation?
awesome question. No, let me think on how to bring my thoughts into here. No estimates. What do you think about? Now let's I think let's divide it into two questions, if that's okay. So no estimates. What do you think about it? Now I really love that movement. Let's call it a movement, because it started on Twitter. That's at least what my history recalls, and it really bring up a lot of discussion and probably also a lot of noise about why should we estimate, what's the purpose, and that was great. I think from a learning opportunity for the whole community. So I really enjoyed that, because I also learned a lot in following this discussion, learning and community. Although on the other hand, there were also some kind of Twitter wars around certain ways on how to do these things. But in general, I think it bring our community as software professionals forward, because there are new concepts and new ideas that we can probably embrace from that. And so maybe we should talk a little bit about what no estimates means. So what I understood out of no estimates is when you're getting a question that you're trying to answer with estimates, then the idea here is, and that this is what I thought, is you try to step back and try to answer that question differently. And typically, there are, in my experience, from the external stakeholders, there are typically two questions. When will it be done? When will it be done? And the second thing being, how much until a certain date? And then related to that is, how much does it cost? And now I think one idea of the no estimates movements is really that if someone asks you the question, when will it be done? Then you try to work with that stakeholder and try to, okay, what does the it really mean? What do you mean when you say it? And then there is usually in our complex domain where we are working in as Scrum people, it's really hard to upfront define what this it is. Is it really that new customer service portal with this 170 screens, a grid and a portal and a map and a thing over there and a lot of mockups and things like that? Is this really what we need? And even if we agree and say, okay, this is really what we need, we have written everything down, this is what we need. And the challenge is the world changes and also we change. So even if we have written down all our requirements, the world moves on and then we have to deal with changing requirements. So the whole no estimates movement brings in this discussion about, okay, it's really hard to really define what this it is. So let's try to approach it differently. And the same thing here with the question about how much until the date. It's again about scope management, if we phrase it like that. And what it really brings to this whole conversation is the sorting of the product backlog. Like we have a long things of to do. And in my experience, if we're working on a good product, the product backlog will never be empty. Because users have new ideas, you have new ideas, I have new ideas, the developers have new ideas. People are trying your products and they're using your products in ways you never thought of. And then potentially you have new ideas on how to build a new feature, a new thing into your product. And that makes the whole product development journey so interesting. So the question of when will it be done? How much does it cost? How much until the date? Could actually be answered in a different way by asking the question, and what's the minimum we try to achieve today? Achieve today. Oh, this sounds like a daily Scrum. What's the minimum we try to achieve this week? This sounds like a sprint, the quarter, and so on. So one thing that in my experience comes out of this no estimate movement is really this notion of we try to break things into smaller pieces. Slicing, functionality, features, product backlog items, user story, whatever it is that you have on your backlog into smaller items. And this is very hard. Slicing along value is very hard in my experience. And I can give you tips later on if that's interesting. Maybe someone can ask a question around that. How to slice a vision into smaller pieces. And so this is one idea, one concept I love about no estimation, slicing it down into smaller pieces, because then we have options. As a product owner can say, should we move more in that direction or move more in that direction? So I think to answer the second question, would the project outcome be better or same if no estimation? I would say at least same and probably better, especially because we are focusing on how much time and resources, energy and money should we invest in a product. So the whole notion as well turns around. So this was the first point. The second point about no estimation. How much should we invest? How much invest in product? This is a very powerful question, especially to ask that to business stakeholders. And if you go to development team, since we're here to talk about the development team, I also used to use the question to go in the similar direction. Okay, team, we have now planned 2 sprints ahead. We know roughly we're going in this direction. We need to talk about this integration piece. And then in the next sprint, we are talking about how we can automate certain stuff over there. Now we have planned roughly 2 sprints. Now what I like doing is to ask the development members, what happens if we just have 1 week? We planned now 2 weeks. What can we achieve in 1 week? And usually, and that's the cool thing about that question, is it sparks ideas. Because the development team says then, okay, I know the documentation for that API over there, we can try to include it. Maybe we will fire up a little mock server and we run some tests against that. And then from that, we can on day 2 then talk to the other team because they have written already an integration for that API, and then we can reuse some code. And that brings in the energy of the developers. And that's, in my experience, again, a very powerful question to deal with that situation. So the question is, what if we have just half the time? What if half time? So that would be 3 things why I think the project outcome would be better with no estimation. Smaller pieces that gives you options. It brings the focus in how much should we invest in a product instead of delivering the whole project. And the 4th is actually a tip, more or less a question that you can ask your development team members. What if we have only half the time? Well, I'm happy with that answer.
Great. Thank you. Thank you,
I think
Peter.
I'm just looking at the time and I'm not sure. Yeah.
No, I think that's great. I think
Yeah. Otherwise,
obviously we can always go longer as well.
okay.
So next question, Elena asks, how do you balance workload between team members to achieve and meet the goals? Is that even the job of the Scrum Master, or shouldn't the team be handling that on their own?
Great question. So balance workload between team members to achieve goals. Is that the job of a Scrum Master? Now let's talk about great teams. And I think if you talk about great teams, now there's one concept that I like about great teams, and this concept is a very old one. It's called psychological safety. Psychological safety. And this is a concept that is written almost in every conference talk, in every major agile talk. They're referencing this idea from Google, a study, Aristoteles, and I think it comes into the to answer this question here when we talk about when I'm done with my job, should I help someone else in the team? And even if I ask this question to me, this is a bit smelly to me. Smelly means something is off. Smelly means something is not quite right in that team, because it's never my goal. It's never my work, my task, my assignment, my thingy. It's always a team's job. And great teams will see and find out if they need to do something, if they are on track, if another team member has a bad day, and we can overcome with that. If there is an issue in the personal life of someone, and how do we deal with that? And so this is one input that I think makes a team great. And the job of a Scrum Master is not to fix those problems, not to do some, I mean, he probably does something in this situation. What I highly recommend is bring the problem to the team. And in other words, if you know the Scrum Master language, then it's ask the team. So for example, if you see if you are a Scrum Master and you have a team with 6 people and you see one person seems to be very busy, has a lot of workload, is working long hours, and other people are leaving the office at 4, you could mirror that problem back to the team and say, hey, people, do you see that as well? Some people are leaving early, some people are working late, some people are very busy, some people are not. Some people have sweat on their skin. Some people are very easygoing, I'm having a good time, and so on. Is this a problem for you? Mirror that back to the team and let the team fix that problem and deal with that problem. That's the job of a Scrum Master, I think. And in a great team, this will balance out and go by itself. Usually when I see this problem, it could be tool related, because depending on the tool we're using, Jira, DevOps, Azure DevOps, Trello, or whatever we are using to manage our work, some tools have these work assignment box or a team member selection area, things like that. And usually if you use that feature of the tool, then it goes in the direction of, okay, you're assigning work to people. Even if they pull the work to themselves, it's still about, this is Stefan's job and this is Mario's item and things like that. So I try to go away from those things. So it's always a team's job, a teamwork. And the second thing, what I have very good experience with is mob programming or ensemble programming, and how it is called in some cultures, where the whole team gets together and works on one thing for a certain amount of time until it's done. So 2 things to consider: tool, ? And the practice of mob programming. Did I answer that question? That would be interesting to hear from the audience. I don't know.
I think so. I think
Okay.
I think that's certainly a good start, and obviously you have to do it in a very short period of time. So that's great. We've got another question. How do you coach teams to see the Scrum events as valuable sessions of work and not just more meetings?
That's a very interesting question, but as a Scrum Master, you need to, let's assume you are a Scrum Master. So you coach the team, you help the team, then it's your job to explain why we are doing this. Why are we doing a retrospective? Why are we doing a sprint review? Why are we doing a sprint planning? Why are we doing a sprint refinement every now and then, and the product owner by himself or with someone else and things like that? So the why question is really key. You need to be able to explain that. If you can't explain that, there is a great training where we talk about that. So this is the little advertisement window, the Professional Scrum Master training, where we talk exactly about this topic. This is all about the why behind the events and the purpose and why the events are there and whatnot. So if you can teach that, then you can also ask questions around that. So for example, if let's assume, let's talk about the sprint retrospective as an example of the Scrum event. What's the why behind the sprint retrospective? Now you could ask a question. The question could be, how do we get better in working together? How do we know that we are getting better at working together? How could we raise our quality of our work? How could we make our customers more happy? How could we improve collaboration to other teams? There is an event for that. Yes, what's that event? The event is the sprint retrospective. You could obviously do more. You can always talk about how to improve things, but there is a specific event in Scrum defined where we try to work on the collaboration part of the team. And for me, you need to be able to explain that and then coach with questions. That usually helps. Value, the why, and the purpose. Let's make this a short one, and let's move on to the next one. Except you want to add something, Eric?
No, I think that's great. I think certainly a big part of it is they need to get the value out of it. If they're not getting value out of it, we need to look at why, and we need to look at how do we make them more valuable. I've seen quite often that these events, let's look at the daily Scrum, just becomes a status meeting. And if it's just a status meeting, no one's getting value out of it, and we're going through the motions. We need to move from from going through the motions to really making sure it's valuable and really facilitating that and finding other ways. There's a great website called tastycupcakes.org that has lots of different techniques and kind of ways of running the different Scrum events, for example. And it's a great opportunity to learn and try different things. And what I see is, let's try different things to be to make them more valuable and make sure that the team's getting more value out of them. So we've got another question. We've got time for probably a couple of more. What techniques can you as a Scrum Master use if the organization has been reluctant in adopting Scrum? What can you do? This gets back to how do you facilitate and how do you get the organization really bought into what you're doing?
Cool. I love this question because usually this question comes from, at least in my experience, this question comes a lot from developers and engineers. How do we get others to change? How do we get others to change or to embrace product mindset, agile mindset, different ways on how I get this question. And in my experience, what this really usually what this really means is a couple of potential root causes for this problem. Now, one potential root cause is we cannot do it. Now, what does that mean? So that means even if the org would now embrace Scrum and working in sprints, return of investments in sprints, budgeting happens on sprints, and embrace the whole concept of a sprint as a return of investment container. First, and this is the hard part, and this is also where I like to come into organization and into team, we need to actually be able to do that. And so able to show that we can actually work in that manner. What does that mean? That means what typically I see with organizations, or at least sometimes, is the Mickey Mouse model. So the Mickey Mouse model basically means we are doing coding in sprints. So the sprint is actually a container, a time box for coding. But the real testing is then something we do properly at the end. Or the whole release management is something we do properly, or documentation we do properly, or monitoring of our infrastructure. This is another department, they do that properly, and things like that. So this is at the end of the coding part. And at the beginning of the sprint, there is a design phase, there is an analysis phase, there is a planning phase where we talk about investments, there is budgeting, there is more and more things, and all these things we do properly. But only the developers are only allowed to code in sprints. Now, this has nothing to do with Scrum, because this is not proper Scrum at all. And if teams are working in this manner, then it's usually twofold. So first of all, I think, and this is why I love to talk about the software development. First of all, we need to build up trust that we can actually do all this in a sprint. What about if this is our sprint? So can we actually write code, test our code, release to production, document our code, monitor our APIs, design a feature, and do some analysis with the user, talk with the user about his problems, find a potential solution, work on a user experience prototype, and do all that in a sprint? And if we can prove that we are able to do this in a sprint, then in my experience, it's very easy to trust, okay, and then also say, okay, now you get more and more power. We empower the teams then. And for me, this is the interesting way to think about if an organization is reluctant to embrace the full power of Scrum. I think it's if from the position of the developers, it's can we actually build up trust that we are able to do this. And so this is one, I think this is one puzzle piece in order to make this work. The other puzzle pieces probably being okay, now we need a lot of skills in actually to do this. The another puzzle piece being, okay, now we have a lot of departments that are responsible for this. Now, if we are going to change this whole setup on how we work, what happens with the other people and the other departments? So this is all about the silos we typically have in organizations. Another potential puzzle piece could be, how do we plan work? Are we still thinking and working in projects? Are we budgeting projects, or are we investing into products? And so these are there are potentially 10 reasons why an organization is reluctant to embrace the full Scrum power. But I think from the developer perspective, and this is why we're here today, it's really, can we actually do what we try to want? And the model I showed you is the Mickey Mouse model, or the water scrum fall. I think it was coined by Dave West, or
Yep.
I think, yeah. So this is basically water scrum fall that I showed. And basically, if we can build up trust that we actually can do this, no manager would say no to that, because, wow, this is cool. I would love to work with a team that can get an idea and slice it into small chunks, iterate over them, put it in production, test with users. Is this a good idea? Can we build it? Does it make sense? Does it fit in our product portfolio? Reduce risks based on those. That's huge. So no manager could say no to that, I think.
Great. Thank you, Peter. I want to be conscious of everybody's time here, as well, as we're just about on the hour. So I want to say thank you to you, Peter. Thank you to our guests. We had a great set of questions. We were not able to get to them all, but Peter will review them and try to answer them via email the best that he can. And with that, please, keep a look at our schedule. We're always running events like this, as well as more presentation style webinars. And with that, everybody, please be safe and have a great rest of your day. Thank you all. Bye, Peter.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure. I had a lot of fun.
Thanks.